Thank you for visiting the YouTube channel for bestbiblecommentaries.com. In this video, I'd like to show you Colossians and Philemon in the BECNT series. Before I do, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to this channel so you can see videos on Bible commentaries, study Bibles, and other resources that help people understand God's Word. Biblical scholar G.K. Beale is the author of Colossians and Philemon in the Baker Exegetical Commentary on the New Testament series. This commentary was published in 2019. It is 514 pages in length. This is the newer cover design for the BECNT series, but this is the only cover design that this particular volume has been released in. G.K. Beale, if you're not familiar with him, is a professor of New Testament at Westminster Theological Seminary. He is Reformed, evangelical, and conservative. He has written many books, including well-reviewed commentaries. His volume on Revelation in the New International Greek Testament Commentary series is considered by many to be the best commentary on the book of Revelation. He also wrote the 1st and 2nd Thessalonians volume in the IVP New Testament Commentary series. And one of his areas of expertise is the New Testament's use of the Old Testament, and that's a prominent theme found in his commentaries, including this volume. The series preface to the BECNT series explains that the overall approach of the series is to discuss the biblical text, to explain the biblical text within the framework of evangelical thought. So that's the direction that Beale takes this commentary, and that's the direction other commentaries in the series take as well. Let me show you the table of contents so you can get an idea of the layout. Table of contents, not surprisingly, follows the outline for the two epistles found in this volume. There's an introduction of 22 pages for the book of Colossians, and there's an introduction of about 8 pages for the book of Philemon. The chapters follow the biblical text. They vary in length depending on the content of the material in the text. Within the chapters, Beale's providing a verse-by-verse commentary, and he's using as his primary English translation the NASB, the New American Standard Bible Translation, and that's different than other BECNT volumes. A lot of authors provide their own translation. Beale uses the NASB, and then when but he will make suggestions for translations of words and phrases that he thinks just better fits the Greek. So he'll add in his own translation as well. I would describe this commentary as mid-level to advanced. It's not technical. There is discussion of recent biblical scholarship. There is discussion of Greek grammar and Greek syntax with Greek lettering in the main body of the commentary, but most of that information is going to be found in the footnotes and in the additional notes section of each chapter. So that said, this commentary is not for the scholar. Scholars certainly may benefit, but the target audience is pastors. Let me show you an example section so you get an idea of what the chapters are like. Once you understand one chapter, you understand how they're all laid out. So the title of the chapter is B, and that follows the outline from the table of contents that I just showed you. And also on the first page of every chapter at the very top is a portion of the outline, so you can get a good idea of the context for this particular section. So that's why this chapter starts B. Believers should live only on the basis of Christ, Colossians 2, verses 6 through 15. The introduction for every chapter has a gray background, so it's easy to distinguish it from the other material in the chapter. Next is the exegesis and exposition, which is the NASB in this case, and then the verse-by-verse commentary follows. The chapter and verse are found in bold on the left or right-hand side margins, so it's really easy to use these BECNT commentaries as reference tools. You can find what you're looking for very quickly. So just as an example, so chapter 2, verse 6 gets about 2.5 pages of treatment. Chapter 7 gets about 1.5 pages of treatment. Chapter 2, verse 8 gets about 1 page of treatment. Chapter 2, verse 9 gets about 3 pages of treatment, and so on. So this is an in-depth exegetical commentary, verse-by-verse commentary. Every chapter ends with the same section as well, so let me just show you that. This is called additional notes. Oh, it's also smaller font size as well. Get your glasses and you'll be able to read through this. I don't know how much time pastors would spend in this section. What's found here is more discussion on the Greek grammar and syntax, recent biblical scholarship, manuscript discussion when that's relevant, issues regarding textual criticism and alternative readings and things like that. So maybe more for the professor and scholar, but some pastors might find it interesting as well. So that's the layout of not just this chapter, but every chapter follows that same general outline. So what about reviews? This commentary was released in, I think it was the middle of 2019, or maybe toward the end of 2019. And so a lot of academic journals, the more frequent ones are release a publication about every quarter, but some of them are just twice a year. Some of them are just once a year. So sometimes it just takes time to get a sense of what are the aggregate reviews on a particular commentary. But nevertheless, the Presbyterian Academic Journal released a review of this volume in the last quarter of 2019. So that's one. And what it said, the reviewer said that Beale has produced another fine commentary. The BECNT series is solid top to bottom and is clearly organized and accessible for the educated and busy pastor. The conclusion of the review was that I recommend this commentary, and it will be one that I look to as I preach through the two epistles in the future. So, excellent review from the Presbyterian. A couple of examples that I'll give you regarding content. First is authorship. So there are many modern commentaries on Colossians that deny Pauline authorship or significantly question it almost to the point of denying it. And so Beale interacts with that issue quite a bit in this commentary. And his conclusion is that Paul either wrote the epistle himself or authorized it to be dictated to a secretary or co-authored it with Timothy. That's Beale's position. So he argues against it being pseudepigraphical, or meaning someone else wrote it and just attached Paul's name to it. But he also allows for the idea that Paul did not write it with his own pen, so to speak, but he dictated it or co-authored it with Timothy. But he was intimately involved with the book, and the book presents his thought, Paul's own thoughts. So Beale elaborates on this in the way that he pushes back against the critics of Pauline authorship, and it's over several pages. But just to put it in my own words, Beale says that these people bring critical presuppositions to the study of Paul's epistles, and that they use inconsistent criteria that they don't employ elsewhere. So that's how I would describe Beale's pushing back on some of those critics. He also discusses the fact that the early church fathers unanimously accepted Paul as the author of Colossians. And he even states that the early church fathers had great awareness of pseudepigraphical letters and rejected pseudepigraphical letters, yet they accepted that the Apostle Paul wrote the book of Colossians. So that's one example of content. The other example of content that I wanted to give comes from Colossians 3:21, where you get an idea more of application. And so here is what Colossians 3:21 says. Fathers, do not exasperate your children, that they may not lose heart. So out of all this discussion of Greek and biblical scholarship and authorship and so forth, why would I choose this as my second example? It's because I have 4 children, and I wanted to know what Beale had to say about this, because I can use all the help I can get. And I also just think it's a good example. So what he says is, just as Paul gave the husband's obligation following that of their wives, so now he gives the father's duty after addressing the proper role of children. Some view fathers here to be representative of parents, but probably only fathers are in mind, since parents have just been mentioned in verse 20, and the charge to fathers here is likely intentional. In the Greco-Roman and Jewish world, furthermore, fathers were the ultimate authority over the household, as many commentators acknowledge, and are also addressed as the authority in verses 18, 22, and verse 4:1. Now he says in a footnote that Philo, a Greek writer at the time, Beale's just making a point that Philo suggests that children should obey only those commands by parents that are, quote, just and beneficial. Wow. Wouldn't children love to follow Philo? But anyway, Paul has a different idea. He says, fathers are not to embitter or provoke their children. The idea is not to stir up a child to be angry or to be contentious, quarrelsome, or violent, and thus disobedient. He then has a discussion, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it has a discussion on Deuteronomy 21. And this is a good example because this is one of Beale's strengths, is how does the New Testament use the Old Testament, and is Paul relying or alluding to Deuteronomy 21 verses 18 through 22 in this discussion on household roles. So he discusses that there. And then he says, though not mentioned in Colossians, the fathers here are likely to do what Paul commands fathers to do in Ephesians 6:4, to nourish them in the instruction and admonition of the Lord. And he goes on and he actually gives a little commentary on the significance of that instruction from Ephesians 6:4, just so the reader can get the whole view, the entire view of Paul's instruction to fathers. So very helpful. I'm sure it will be difference making for me. So I hope this video has been helpful to you in understanding more about this commentary by G.K. Beale. Please consider subscribing to my channel to see more videos on Bible commentaries. Thank you for visiting bestbiblecommentaries.com.